Congratulations! You are watching my final video. You've made it this far. Um, in this last video, I'm hitting the last point of my discussion on inclusive education, and I'm also going to be summing all three videos up. So, just going to get started. First of all, talking about my future classroom and how to form instruction, curriculum, management, and taking the fact that each child is different into mind when I design a curriculum. What I want to do is make sure that the students that need help are going to receive help, and those that are following the material and maybe even more advanced are being challenged and continuing to move forward. And I think a good way to do that when I form my curriculum would be to form a lot of tier exercises and learning groups. What I want to do is use the power of grouping, especially to help students interact with each other and learn from each other. I think that's going to be one of the most effective things for a classroom of such variety. Having disabled and non-disabled students, and the fact that they're all at different levels in learning. It's going to be important that I'm making sure every single one of them are getting the material and being challenged at the same time. And I think since you can't always do that in a big group discussion, I think maybe introducing content generally in the group as a whole would work. And then what I would need to do was take the students and put them in groups, either based on their ability, so I could have homogeneous groups, or I could form heterogeneous groups, and maybe pair one student with someone who's stronger in the subject and have them sort of help that person, and maybe they would learn more from that student who maybe could speak to them more at their level than I could, and hopefully have the student learn more effectively through that type of grouping. So that's one part of my curriculum that I would want to definitely have when planning. Another thing would be to make sure any accommodations and modifications are made for students, and making sure that I have those supplies and that way of scaffolding ahead of time, just so in class I'm prepared, and I don't have to work with the child a lot outside of class. I could just be prepared for it when it comes, if they're lost or if they're not understanding something. What we learned in special needs, a powerful word, prevention, would definitely be a goal of mine when forming my curriculum. So accommodations, as far as if I had disabled students in my classroom, I actually did a project here for one of my modules in my special needs class, and what it does is it has all 13 disabilities. You see the white piece of paper have all the characteristics, and underneath, if I were to flip one, it has modifications and ways suggested ways of teaching the child. Some examples, just to pull up autism. And if I were to work with an autistic child in my classroom, usually autistic children, they lack those social cues from other people, and very repetitive. They like routines, and their interests are very limited. Usually autistic children have a few things that they're very good at, whether it's music, math, excuse me, it's just a matter of taking those characteristics and putting it into the curriculum for that child. Usually with their IEP, it'll tell you what they need in order to receive a beneficial education. But some of the modifications I have here are to teach social behavior. So somehow in my curriculum I want to be including small things to sort of teach children right from wrong, and that also goes with classroom management. If I have clear rules of what's acceptable and what's not socially, it's very important that I have that come across and make sure that this child knows and continues to follow these rules, and eventually, hoping that these will stick with that child if I create that management and enforce it regularly, which I should be. Also, if the child does have limited interests, and if you see that if I were to see the child in my class isn't learning a topic, in my case it would be something in math, maybe they're not understanding interior angles, for example, in a shape, and I need to somehow teach this autistic child, well, this shape has this many sides, so it's going to have this many angles inside. And maybe the child likes cooking. For example, I could use a cake. If I were to tell them that a cake was 360 degrees, and slice the cake into 6 pieces, and ask them, how many angles is each one of the slices of cake, I'm sure they'd be more interested in that, where I'm involving something that they're interested in, than just simply trying to explain over and over again that 360 divided by 6 is 60 degrees. And one more. For example, if I have a student that is deaf in my classroom, I have multiple ways of being able to deal with that. One, the deaf child may need certain equipment and different, more visual aids than most students, because obviously they may not, some may have hearing aids, but others may not be able to hear all, and so I would need to make sure that I have multiple visual examples and make sure that they are able to really lost the word I was going to say, but basically there are going to be many things you need to keep in mind when trying to teach a deaf student. Basically, main things that I have besides needing more visual ways of teaching, they may need a signer as far as accommodations. And while talking, I need to make sure that I am speaking to them. They can see me and my lips move so that they're more able to not just see the information I may have on a slideshow, but if they're seeing me say it as well, that could very well help them. In groups, if I did do group work, I need to make sure that they have the proper technology and someone there to help them if they needed. So group work is going to have to be more visually designed for that child. And sometimes some deaf children can have trouble reacting in social environments just because they don't always hear everything that goes on, and it's probably going to be very important that I incorporate a lot of group work into that curriculum and make sure that, again, that social rules and management are put into my curriculum, because it's going to be very important that these children learn social aspects. And as I've said earlier, incorporating that in school and lessons can make a world of difference for disabled students. So just a few examples of how to change my curriculum. Of course, there's 13 disabilities, and I don't want to make this video too long, but it's generally, as far as curriculum, making sure I have every aspect of every method involved in my teaching: visual, audio, and kinesthetic, making sure the students that can't see hear more of what we're doing, making sure that if they can't hear, that they're seeing it, making sure that the students' interests are incorporated into my lessons, going to be very important. So a lot of social games to get to know them is going to be very important. And my instruction, I'm going to have to be very careful as far as what type of children I have in my classroom, but basically I can't use the same instruction for all of my students. I have to make sure, and I mentioned a tier technique, where there are different things happening in different groups, and even within a group, making sure that I can direct myself to every group and make sure that I am working with them at their level and making them more successful at their own pace. And I can't be grading students all the same. I need to make sure that if the child needs help or needs extra assistance, or even if they just need little things like a paper printed larger so they can see it, I have to think of all of these things ahead of time when the child enters my classroom. And that's where looking at IEPs and being knowledgeable about their disability will come in, and of course cooperating with all the parents and all of the professionals needed in the situation. But even if I don't have disabled students in my classroom, I still think a tier approach and really making sure that group work is prominent is probably what I would go for in a classroom, and making sure that the curriculum really is something that they can relate to, especially in math. And I know that I'm only talking about my own subject, but it is what I want to teach, so I guess it should be what I talk about the most. But especially in math, you hear a lot of students say, oh, math is pointless. I don't get why we use it. Especially high school math. I have to say that saddens me when I hear that, because it is important. Math is very important. That's, it's what engineers use to build buildings, and, we use math in simple computations. I work at McDonald's, and I can't tell you how many times I have to fix correct change or figure out money in Canadian if it's American or something along those lines. It's subtle, but you're doing math all the time, and so students need to be shown that it happens all the time. They need to be shown that in real life, this is where you're going to use this. This is where this is going to be put into play. And I think they'd respect it. So making sure that my curriculum relates to real life as much as possible is going to be important. As far as classroom management, I think for me, especially first starting out, having a good set of rules and expectations to follow is going to be really important. It's not my forte by any means, discipline. It never has been. But I know that if there are no rules put in place, students do not know what to expect, so students most likely are going to act out or do what they want because there are no expectations. So going over that with students prior to the school year is going to be very important. I think basic rules are going to be important, such as knowing what to do in social situations in class, being respectful and raising your hand, listening to others. I think being prepared will be an important one. Always participate. Ones that I guess are more or less common sense, but still need to be addressed in the classroom. And I would probably even have students help come up with a few rules of their own. I think having ownership of their own rules is going to give them more motivation to follow them. At least that would be what I hope would happen. And I think as far as there are going to be situations that don't happen every day. So, for example, when I was in my internship, I was able to experience what happens when the students go to an assembly and time is taken away from class and they have to go to the Performing Arts Center and sit and I keep saying that, I'm sorry. And that's something that needs to happen prior to the event. I know students knew that the assembly was happening well ahead of the time. It was announced a few times that day as well. What do you do when you're ready to leave? Those things I think also need to be addressed to students ahead of time. So out of the ordinary situations and ones that are not so ordinary, like fire drills, making sure students know what to do in fire drills and group situations in class. So just basically having a sturdy rule system, I guess, is the summary of all of this. And it asks what styles of teaching I'll use. And my classroom and why I feel they're effective. One style I just mentioned was using a tier effect, or putting the students in groups based on their ability. I really think that that use of interaction and having students working together to solve a problem is going to get the gears flowing in their brain, and it's going to really make them think about ideas and think about others' ideas and say, well, I didn't think of that. So group work is one method. I guess we can call it a method. Definitely, as far as math, a lot of direct instruction and demonstration is needed to introduce content, and most of the time what's introduced will go into the next section. So always informing students of where we're going and what's going to happen the next time is going to be very important. But really being able to show students examples, and this is how it's done, and this is what this means, and this is, how to graph a point on an XY coordinate. It's just awkward silence. Where am I going? It's very important that you not just directly introduce students to a subject, but you also, if it requires demonstration, it needs to be demonstrated to them. That you can't just say, well, here's an XY equation, and here's a paper on how to graph it, and give it to them and say good luck. How mean would that be? But as a teacher, I need to be demonstrating as well. And once the students have seen how I solve an equation, then it's up to them. I'm going to make them solve their own equation, and that's how I'm going to tell whether they understand it or what they're having trouble with. So using both direct and procedural knowledge is going to be very important, and just making sure I'm checking students' progress constantly is going to be a goal of mine. Why I feel it's effective is basically, at least for me, I think math, if I was shown something and then asked to perform it and received feedback, I learned the skill very quickly. So I think direct procedural knowledge, I think being taught in a sequence from being taught, from being introduced to something, demonstration, and having the students perform that task, having them practice it, is really an effective method. And especially applying the knowledge, that is what is really going to help the students put that knowledge into a long-term memory. As far as how I would do it, again, I would try activities and try incorporating real-life situations and projects into my classroom, and hopefully making it as real as possible is going to make the information make more sense to the students. my characteristics, my personal characteristics and approach to teaching, and how it would impact the development of students, I would hope that my I would hope that I had a positive impact on my students, because I am wanting them to do the best that they can, because I am believing in them and showing them that, I'm really passionate about what I'm teaching, and I want that to come across to my students, and I want them to catch on, and I hopefully want them to pick up on the positives that I am displaying in my classroom. The good behavior practices that should be happening, and my management skills, my hands-on approach to teaching. I would hope that that engages my students and really gives them an appreciation of what they're doing, instead of listening to me lecture an entire class. I would hope that actually doing it makes a lot more sense to them, and they find that math is useful, and math is something that they can take with them. Maybe not all of the time, but if they are ever stuck and need math in their life, that they have it. And I would hope that they develop to be the positive person that I try to portray when I teach, when I am in class, and really encouraging them and just pushing them along to be the most successful students that they can be. I hope that they see that, and that that all the work that I put in for them will make them want to put in the work for themselves to become the better students that I know they can be, and that they should know that they can be. I think that was a mixture of how I want them to develop as students and how I want them to remember me. So I guess I won't go into that, but my last point that I want to go over is using RTI and include, which I think is going to be an important method and one that I need to use constantly in my teaching career. So, first of all, a concept of RTI. RTI is a tier instruction approach, which I mentioned I wanted to use in my classroom, but this is for assessing students. First of all, students need to be assessed in the RTI system to make sure students need to be assessed first in the RTI system. This is how teachers and other personnel will tell whether the child is having difficulty with a certain area, and if they are, then that child then goes to a tier system. So tier 1 is obviously the lowest, and that's where most of the students are placed. Many will not need assistance, and few will, and they may be minor problems or minor skills that can be helped with in a regular classroom, and they may not need much assistance with it, but still need some work to help them develop any skills that they're lacking. If they find that there's more of a problem with that skill with the child moves into a second tier, tier 2, and this is where another, and I have the numbers somewhere, so 10 to 15% of students will go into tier 2, and 80 to 85% of students in tier 1, which I forgot to mention. So as you can see, there's a smaller amount of students in tier 2, and then within that tier, they're going to be focusing a little more on what that child is struggling with. It's going to be a more direct one-on-one instruction, and this can involve having like separate time in a classroom from the rest of the class to work on, let's say, phonics, if the child is having trouble with pronunciation. And lastly, if found that the student is, going through, and what's important with RTI is it's research-based, so all of the methods that they use to help these children are researched and proven to help a student in some way. But if the child is still not responding from these methods, they will go into tier 3. It's the third tier, and most known as the special education tier. That is 5 to 10% of students, and this is where, of course, the child, after going through tier 1 and 2, has been qualified. This is important. The child has to be tested and qualified for special education, and they go into tier 3, and tier 3 obviously works very intensively with the child and works with them on either one or more areas that they're struggling with, and most likely they'll be taken out of the classroom at times to work in that special education section. Basically, we've gone through many case studies in class where a child is having trouble with reading, and basically what happens with RTI, there's a method called UNCUT, and UNCUT is a system of identifying a child's needs and problems, and then finding methods or identifying ways of trying to fix these problems with research-based methods. So whether it's a problem with time management, or whether it is they're unable to focus, or similar problems. There are 9, and what happens is you need to identify which of those that the child has, whether they can't finish work in a time frame, or they can't focus during class, and find ways of helping that child to focus and to stay on task. With me, I just have one case study that we did in class, that I'll just quickly go over as an example. And after that, my presentation should be done. But basically, here it is. Okay. So I have a guide to include, and you probably can read that, but basically include, each letter in the word include stands for a step that needs to happen. So step 1 in include is identifying classroom demands. So if I had a student who, for example, if I had a student that, and I'm just going to use an example of one in class because I'm just going to, I have multiple case studies here that we were given in class, and for example, I did the first one myself and include strategy on one of the, I did a case study myself on a girl named Betsy in this case study. And basically, Betsy is 13 years old and she has difficulty handling schoolwork, and it's due to specific reading problems. Reading is difficult for this child, and she can't handle the demands of the content subjects in the content subject areas in the 7th grade, probably mostly due to her reading problems. However, this child has a great sense of humor and she can express herself very well and has insight and feelings about her learning problems. So she has trouble reading, and she can't handle some of the content subject areas and the demands that come with them, but she is aware of her situation. She doesn't hide from it, which is good, that it shows signs of being able to help her. So although she's had help with reading over the last few years, she has become discouraged because her reading has not improved significantly. She appears to have taken responsibility for her failure upon herself. And Betsy's learning problems are compounded by frequent absences from school and interfered with consistency in learning. To add to that, it says Betsy has poor visual and motor coordination, and it's reflected in her handwriting. Uneven and inconsistent phonics knowledge, a poor sight vocabulary, and some reversals of letters and words. She is anxious, tense while reading. Though Betsy makes many mistakes, she has a quick grasp of essential materials she needs and can understand material read to her at the 7th grade level. Her reading of words in isolation is at the mid-3rd grade level. So basically, to sum up what we just read, Betsy, she's had trouble reading and it's discouraging her. and because of it, she is, she's not able to keep up with the rest of her classes, and to add to that, she has poor visual motor coordination, so she has trouble writing, and it must be embarrassing for her to try to write papers. It must be really difficult to finish her work on time. Just looking ahead, but she gets very anxious and tense while she reads, and yet she's able to grasp concepts quickly. So although she can't read, she's still good at understanding what's happening if it's explained to her. So it's just a matter of finding a way to improve her reading, but not in a way that you're completely, lowering her level of work. So with this case study given, I was asked to perform and include overview of her situation and basically form a conclusion as to how I would help Betsy. And first off, it asks for classroom demands. So I go through and it asks to describe the classroom situation. Basically, for me, it'd probably be rows. And if I were to group students, probably be about 4 people. Any materials, I would say if the child's having trouble reading and lacking in motor skills, I would say motor coordination skills, that she would need, maybe audiobooks would be very useful to her. Technology such as typing, even though she's not able to write properly, I think typing on a keyboard would make things a little easier to read for her. And then it asks what I would use for instructional methods. So she still has a good understanding of material, and she seems very aware of what's going on. She's just having trouble reading. So I think a lot of direct instruction and I think scaffolding as far as reading, helping her as she reads to pronounce words and to learn those phonics that she's having difficulty with. Definitely one-on-one work with her reading, never having her read in front of a big group of people, but if she read in front of like myself, her parents, maybe one other person in class, just small one-on-one sessions, I think that would be beneficial for her. And second step is to note the student's strengths and needs. So strengths is she's well aware of her situation. She knows that she's having trouble. She's not denying it. She's well aware and able to express her learning needs, which I see as a positive. And as far as social emotional, she has a really good sense of humor, which is really good to hear with someone that is struggling. I know for me, if I struggle with something, I can't shake it off. I get very stressed or upset. So the fact that she has a great sense of humor is going to really help her when applying methods to help her reading. In physical development, she, just because she has poor motor coordination skills. She doesn't have any health concerns as far as any severe medical needs that are going to take her out of the classroom or take away from her learning. So I saw that as a plus. Needs, and it goes through again academic, social, physical. Of course, she's going to need academically help with reaching that 7th grade reading level, or at least improving her reading level by, well, I don't need to go into methods now, but she really needs one-on-one work with that. And emotional, social emotional, she needs support. I think she just needs to have somebody there for her and helping her, reach a higher level in in reading. Physical development. Basically, the only need is she has difficulty working with her hands, writing, and she may need assistance with that. May need a note taker or other technology for her to record notes in class, maybe typing on a computer or using a tablet and just being able to tap letters instead of trying to write. Step 3 is C, which is check for potential success. And I think there's a lot of potential with this child. She has great concept awareness. She's good at grasping things, but she's not good at reading them. I think if you can improve her reading and phonics by really having her hear something while reading something and knowing and improving her vocab and knowing, well, this is what this word means. Just being able to see and make that connection for her, I think, would be very important. So working on her phonics and vocab. Also, her handwriting, I think, can be improved with practice or maybe some devices that can be used for her. So I definitely think that those can be potential successes for her. The L in include is look for potential problems. And basically, my potential problems, reading aloud, she gets very tense and nervous, so I would not have her reading aloud in class unless it's well prepared or she is willing to do it, or if it's easy enough for her to read. And not just reading aloud, but she has trouble reading in general. Not everything, but she reads at a 3rd grade level and she's in 7th grade, so obviously there are some things that she's been struggling with. So I really think that working with not just reading, but when trying to read work in other subjects, she's going to have a very hard time, especially social studies has a lot of reading involved to it, and that some of those terms and vocabulary can be very, very challenging, even if you are at a 7th grade level. I think the classroom setup may or may not be a problem. I think if she's in a group and students are asked to write a paragraph on what they did over the weekend, she may feel a little embarrassed by her handwriting or get frustrated because she has trouble writing and the students may finish before her. That can be a problem. So maybe keeping the classroom in rows until she feels comfortable. And then I think I've looked at all of the potential problems. So basically the next step and include is you. Sorry, this is such a dragged out process, but basically it's using information gathered to brainstorm instructional accommodations. So basically what happens is I just identified problems for this child, and now I'm going to divide it between classroom organization and classroom grouping, and then I'm going to identify the problem and find possible accommodations. And so I'm going to take the problem of poor sight vocabulary and put it into one of my sections, and then I'm going to think of possible accommodations for that child. So for me, I think poor sight vocabulary, there can be many accommodations. It could be highlighting the word, and maybe on worksheets, if you define more difficult words for that child, maybe to the side or above the word, making sure that that child is able to understand that word. So just helping them out that way. Labeling things in the classroom can give that child a better understanding, especially if this child, it didn't say, but you never know if the child grew up learning another language first, has a multilingual family, and so I think maybe that could be part of the problem, potentially. I'm not 100% sure, but it didn't say in the case study. So maybe labels, identifying words, and maybe flashcards would help this child as well. Taking difficult words in a book and putting them on flashcards, and then having the student then go over the words themselves. Just a few accommodations that come to mind for me. I know this is kind of brief, but moving on to instructional materials. As far as her visual motor problems, I think having technology around will be the biggest fix for her. I think having a laptop to type or a tablet where she can just tap letters will help her significantly. And as far as reading, audiobooks would be what I would recommend, and really making sure that she hears the words along with them being read herself, so that way she's getting more than one way of getting that information and understanding it and really putting it into a long-term memory. I'm going to skip some of them. You've seen, I just gave you 2 examples of identifying a problem and finding accommodations. So the D in include is deciding which accommodations to implement. And of course, as a general education teacher and having students with multiple problems, and there are so many, you can't work on every single one with the student. Some will not be able to be improved in a short period of time, and you have to choose carefully what's going to be best for the child. So what I ended up choosing to implement was her phonics and content. I think that can be improved for her, especially if she has good concept awareness. And the demand area, of course, is reading and writing. And then my selected accommodation, I can use an example I had earlier. So I could take vocab words from texts that we read. I can highlight them and put the definition with them, and I can use flashcards to really improve her vocabulary. And using one-on-one to work on those words that she needs help pronouncing. Steps to prepare for and implement the accommodation. I would say to first see at what point she needs to start, at what level I would say she needs to start reading. You can't take her too far away from her class and content area, but as far as the reading level, that needs to be taken down a little bit for her. And wow, I'm having a really hard time. And it's almost done. So taking the level down to where she needs to be, I think starting back closer to the 3rd grade level with vocabulary, so changing some of the vocabulary on her homework would be a step that I would take, and really having some one-on-one activities with her, having her listening to audiobooks as she reads to really hear those sounds, and then reviewing them with her one-on-one. And I think the more she's exposed to vocabulary, definitions, and the more that she is read to or listens to books being read to her from audio, I think it's going to really help her finally learn those sounds and definitions that she's been lacking. Last step is evaluate, and evaluation, of course, is important. You need to be always tracking a student's progress and finding the methods that are working and if they aren't, you need to be changing them as a teacher. So of course, so you just so in the last section I identified what area I'll be working on the child with, which is reading, writing, and her problem was phonics and content, and the accommodation was using flashcards and highlighted vocabulary as a main one, and of course you'd put a date that you started. And what I'd be tracking was first of all, having her reciting definitions, maybe starting off with so many words a day, introducing them, and going through how to pronounce them, and then working on, well, what is the definition of the word, and after so many days, seeing how many words the child finally learns, and continuing to introduce and assess how many words this child learns and whether the methods are working. Of course, the words would go along with the audiobooks that I would have for that child. And so maybe after the child listens to the book and follows along, the child can come in and I could assess her by having her read a passage that she listened to that previous night and seeing how well she does with it, and maybe do it a few days and see, well, has it improved? So that's a little bit of progress that I could be taking from that. And of course, I'd be collecting this information weekly, making sure that each week she's learning the words that she's been given, and listening to her audiobooks and being able to pick up new pronunciations. Who will be responsible? Of course, I as a teacher will be responsible for collecting data, and I need to be continually collecting it and making sure that if it's not working, I'm changing it. And after a certain point, it needs to be given a certain period of time, I believe it's 12 weeks, that the child needs to be I believe it's so many weeks. The child needs to be put through these assessments, and if the data I'm collecting is saying the child is not responding, then the child will have to go to higher services. So that was kind of a long overview and probably a little boring, but that is an example of a case study performed for a student and how to go through different steps of include and assess that student. Though it may sound boring, me just talking about it, it's very important, and it's something that I'm going to need to use in my classroom constantly. So it's important that I have this information. Whew, I think I've hit every topic that I need to, and it is very likely that I have missed information or there are some things that I didn't get to talk about, but these videos are kind of long and I wanted to make sure that there wasn't too much, but there was still enough information to provide evidence that I would know how to implement strategies and wanted to really make sure that some of my ideas got across. Just a summary, to go back over what all of my videos have talked about. So way back in the beginning, I talked about my teaching philosophies and why I think teaching is valuable. And basically, I think teaching is a rewarding career. It's one that's not done for money. It's one that I think is valuable because it really develops and helps students discover themselves while instilling them with new knowledge. And we have the ability to impact them for the rest of their lives. You know, I go through and there are teachers that I will always remember. And I think every new teacher wants to be that teacher that, you know, students remember and say, oh, I really like that teacher. Beliefs. I went over the fact that teaching and education should be hands-on. It should be a learning experience for everyone. And I did a little skit with the definitions, the formal definitions of education teaching, went over what I thought of it. And that education should not always be as traditional as we picture. And it should continue to happen our entire lives, that we're learning new information. And teaching should be, you know, showing someone how to do something, yes, but to teach in a way that students truly experience situations that relate to themselves to really make an impact. And my rule, I basically said schools are used as developmental tools as well as you know, a pot filled of information. And I really think that you learn a lot more in school than you think you do. I went over IDEA and my thoughts over the law, which provides a right for every student to be educated, disabled or not, which I fully agree with. As far as the purpose, I think it's to make sure that every student, every child receives the rights to an education, but also those developmental experiences that I talked about that non-disabled students go through. It's very important for any child to go through social development and behavioral development, not just non-disabled students. And I went over my thoughts, my position on inclusive education, including students, and basically I think students should be included, you know, at all you know, students should be included when possible at all times. And whether it's in general education or special education, students still need to experience that, you know, love of learning and social interaction. Ooh, and then I went into my role as a teacher and the process of including parents and students in an included education. Basically talking about the importance for me to be knowledgeable of students with disabilities, not just of their disability, but to try and understand difficulties that they go through and be aware of that. Also, to be aware of what the parents deal with, and not just to another term we learned in special needs was to show empathy, which is to try to put myself in that person's shoes and to try to understand what the parents go through. They have multiple roles in their child's life, and so of course it would be my number one goal to include the student and their parent in that child's education plan, because they're the ones that are going to know how that child learns the best. And basically creating that comfortable, welcoming environment for that child so that they are able to receive an education, stay in a general education classroom, and not feel threatened or looked down upon. Lastly, I just went over in this past video my future classroom procedures and styles of teaching, how I would like to be remembered, and I went over an RTI case study, which may have been long and boring to listen to, but that pretty much sums up my 3 videos. Thank you so much for watching. It may have been very boring at times, but I felt expressing myself in a video would be more personal and well, a little more exciting than reading a paper that I wrote. So I hope I've covered everything as best as possible, and again, thank you for watching.